Now what will it be? Death or exile?
All right, we're gonna start with the...
I want the truth! You can't handle the truth!
You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to.
Should we not follow the advice of the galactically stupid?
You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Worst part of it is they're gonna blame us for the whole thing. And they can't have people knowing the truth. We're the excommunicated. The cover-up. Don't forget, we're the exiles.
Very well. Death by exile.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Film Exiles podcast. Tonight, myself, Millennial Mike, and Gray are going to take on a very important topic, the state of film criticism today. Mike, how are you doing today?
Doing great as always. Well, that's a lie, but I'm doing great right now.
Well, I'm glad to hear you're doing all right, for at least for the duration of the recording of this podcast.
We'll see how that goes. We'll see how that goes.
As soon as we're done, you can go off and
I'm gonna be in a
whatever the
bad
hell it
mood.
is
I
that
can
you
tell.
do.
That reminds me of like stand-up comics who say things like, "Hey, Easter's coming up for the purpose of this next joke."
Oh, see, are you trying to say that we're totally calling what this pod is going to turn into, Gray?
Yeah, something like that. We're already going off the rails.
All right, Gray, how you doing tonight?
I am dandy and fine and dandy, gentlemen.
Great. Thank you both for being here tonight. Thank you to all the listeners, and let's just dive right into it. With the newly released Sony Pictures film Venom, once again we are confronted with this chasm that continues to grow between professional film critics and the people that actually attend and pay to see these movies. So I, along with the other exiles, thought that it would be worth more than just a few tweets and that we should discuss it on this podcast. And I think that I have the perfect guys to talk about this with.
Well, we're all you're gonna get.
No,
I mean,
it's good though because Mike and I are coming at this film. There's a middle ground that we found, but we are coming at it from two very, very different directions. So I think that brings a perspective that I think will be useful to the conversation.
So let's get started. So let's start first and foremost by asking you guys, what is your approach towards reviews? Gray, why don't you get us started? Do you read reviews? Do you use reviews to decide if you're going to go see a movie or not?
I used to. My approach to reviews was always I would look through. Before I went to see a movie, I would look through a handful of reviews, and I would look for commonalities. I would look for individual things that it seemed multiple reviewers were latching onto. Because there's more than likely, if there's a number of things that reviewers are latching onto, if they're hitting the same point over and over and over from review to review to review, more than likely that's going to be an issue. And when I started writing Not the Popular Opinion, I had to stop reading reviews altogether. And especially in the wake of all the Man of Steel and especially Batman v Superman, what I found was reviews were influencing how I would watch the movies. Because even if it was a movie I was enjoying, what I was doing is I was taking those things that I was reading and saying, okay, these reviewers are saying the movie does this, it has this problem, it has that problem, and I was going into the movie looking for those problems, trying to confirm whether they were there or not, and I wasn't watching the movie. And I wasn't paying attention to what was happening in it because I was too busy looking for the things that people were telling me was there.
Confirmation bias.
Confirmation bias, exactly. That's one of the big problems I had going into my first viewing of BVS, was I had read reviews beforehand. I don't care about spoilers, but reviews are different. So you go in looking to see, is there this problem, is there that problem, and if you have this in your head, you'll see it whether it's real or not, whether it's actually there or not. So at this point, I don't I don't read any reviews. I may look at the some of the aggregate scores after I see the movie, or if I absolutely can't avoid it, like somebody's screenshotting it on the timeline or something like that. But for the most part, I don't want other people's thoughts in my head before I see the movie, and then maybe I'll read reviews after I see it. But going into it, I don't want to be thinking anybody else's thoughts or seeing anybody else's perspective. I just want to watch the movie for myself.
Okay, thank you. I can respect that. Millennial Mike, what about yourself?
I feel very similar. With movies nowadays, it feels like it's a very social experience, and I think that that's both a good thing and a bad thing when it comes to movies, especially with things like Rotten Tomatoes and how these aggregates are becoming so accessible and easy, and easy to get to, and easy to digest as well. It seems like there's so many different things that can influence you before you get into the film. That's not even considering the things that the actual people that make these films put out, like trailers and other promotional material. It's hard to go in with a truly like blank and just unencumbered impartial mind sometimes when you have all this other smoke around you. Mm-hmm. I used to, just like Gray, watch YouTube reviews, particularly because I really got into the personalities of these reviewers, and I just really like to listen to them talk. But it got to a point where I was watching reviews to movies that I knew I was never going to watch anyway, but I just liked to hear what they had to say. And then when I started watching their reviews about movies that I actually cared about, that I actually watched, I kind of realized the disconnect. Like, okay, that didn't make sense, or
Mm-hmm.
that didn't quite add up. Like that criticism doesn't even 1 + 1 = 3. Like that didn't make sense. And I noticed this more and more and more. And then it really kind of hit me when, once again, movies like Man of Steel and Batman vs Superman came out, and even leading up to their release, all the talk that was going around these films, they were just extremely. There was a very large disconnect between what was being said and what we even knew about the movies at those times. Mm-hmm. And then when the movies came out, we had time to analyze and think about it. Just the more and more that you watched it and you broke it down, the more you realized everything kind of fell apart. And then you wondered, okay, well, these people wrote these reviews. It takes time to do that. I mean, did these people even watch the film at all? So yeah, basically, as far as reviews go, like, I see the value of them, and I used to watch them all the time. I was never really into written reviews. Nowadays, I'll read them for the sake of dismembering them. But mainly I watched a lot of video reviews, and I enjoyed that a lot.
The thing about reviews is, and one of the big problems I think we have is we have made review and critique synonymous, and they're not. A review and a critique are not the same thing. And being critical of something and delivering a critique of something are also not the same thing. Just because they both have the word critic in them somewhere does not make them similar. And we've allowed reviewers and people with critical perspectives to be elevated to the same platform or to the same level of respect as people who give genuine critiques. And we need to stop doing that. People who give reviews, people who write reviews or do YouTube reviews or anything like that, these are people who are giving you their emotional impression of the movie at the time that they saw it. And there are any number of things that can influence how you respond to a movie when you see it, many of which have absolutely nothing to do with the movie itself.
The movie.
I agree with both of you guys. I also have stopped reading reviews. I used to do it all the time. For every single movie that came out, I would just go and basically read most reviewers, actually, just to get a sense of what I was walking into. But I had to stop a few years ago because I started to realize that, just kind of like what Grace said, not only was I taking into the theater what these people were saying, but I was letting that influence how I felt about the movie at times. There were times where there was a movie that I was very excited about seeing that I would not I would not be deterred by it, but it did affect my viewing and my understanding of what I was seeing in front of me at the time. And yeah, so I had to stop reading and trust myself, trust my taste and my perspective. And I think that that genuinely comes just from getting older. I think that when I was younger, I kind of had this thirst for, what's the word I'm looking for?
Approval?
Approval. There you go. Actually, yeah, approval. I had this thirst for approval. I wanted to feel like
Validation.
Validation. That's what I was looking
There
for.
it
Thank
is,
you.
yeah.
I had this thirst for validation. I wanted to be in the right spot when it came to pop culture, when it came to film, to TV. I wanted to be the guy that's in the know. Like, this is what's good, this is what's bad. But now that I'm older and that I have a much more confidence in my palette and in how I feel about the world, therefore movies as well, I found the need to not only read reviews, but even other people's opinion on the films that I'm seeing matter so much less now than they ever did before. And I think that that goes a long way into how I view film, because you bring yourself into every piece of entertainment that you see. You bring
Yep.
your own thoughts, your own emotions, your own experiences.
Mhm.
Somebody else's experience will not relate to you because you are your own person. Nobody else has ever or will ever feel exactly the way that you do about things. So once I understood that, reading reviews and searching for that validation just became unnecessary and unnecessary, and I had to cut it out.
Yeah.
And ever since I've done that, I have been able to enjoy film much, much more than I ever could before, because I am not I'm not walking into them with an established thoughts or knowledge or somebody else's emotion running in front of me.
Right.
You know,
Right.
and
I've seen a number, or remember going to a number of movies very, very much influenced. Movies that I really was very interested in seeing, being very influenced by poor reviews and kind of going, oh, okay, well, I guess this isn't going to be as good as I thought it was going to be. And you go into the movie and you kind of and you walk out, yeah, like you guys said, it's a confirmation bias. You walk out feeling like, yeah, I guess they were right. I guess it really isn't as good as
Yeah.
it could have been.
I feel like with reviews, sometimes, there's so many ways that we absorb other people's feelings and emotions about these films. Social networking is a big one. Reviews, and at the end of the day, what's the difference? I mean, one is a little bit shorter than another. I mean, Twitter's the shortest, and then but maybe even the little tiny snippet that Rotten Tomatoes tells you, like, when you click on the movie, it tells you like a one sentence breakdown of a movie, like that's probably shorter than a tweet, I mean, and that's what people absorb this information as. But you get all this energy, and all this negative energy, around the movie, or positive energy will make you feel differently about it. And, perhaps that's our self-conscious nature about these films, or perhaps it's our need for, or our desire for validation. But I just think that sometimes, we can get into this later, but it goes into a lot of the movie going experience. You don't go to the theater to sit in a room by yourself. We talked about this earlier in the first or second episode.
second,
But movie going is a very social experience, and the buzz in the air. You can feel other people's energy, and that affects the feeling you have, and that kind of starts before you even go into the theater. So, it's just that negative or positive energy that really can influence the film, and it's just more productive for me to stay away from any of it.
Yeah, well, that's when you start to get into the conversation that separates the the film going experience from analysis of the film as a piece of work. Now, the film going experience is a very special thing. I remember, when the Star Wars special editions first came out, midnight showings, being in lines with all these people and everything at 11:30. I remember which theater it was at. I remember who I was with. There's an energy to that. Going to the first time that the trailer played for Star Trek First Contact, or the first time the trailer played for The Phantom Menace, and the first time the trailer played for Batman Begins, and and things like that. You can remember all of those things because that's part of an experience. And I think that's where we start to get into the disconnect, where we are looking to reviewers and critics and things like that to tell us about the film, and they are talking as much about the experience of seeing the film and the kind of cultural place that the film, especially now, we really want to talk about where the films fit in the current cultural climate, instead of talking about the movie. You take a movie like Ghost in the Shell. Ghost in the Shell, as a movie, there's nothing wrong with Ghost in the Shell. It's a fine movie, but it got raked over the coals because of its place in the cultural environment.
I watched that movie last night, and I'm like, man, I enjoyed this movie more now after separating myself, with time and space from when it came out. I enjoyed the movie more now in my room, with my, with my nice sound bar and my TV and all that. I enjoyed it more now than I did back then. When I was watching it, I was like, I'll cut to the chase. A part of me felt guilty for watching the film in the theater. Yeah. I paid for it, and people would have you believe that you're paying and you're supporting something insidious.
Obviously, you obviously support whitewashing. You support racism. Yeah. You support this. You support that because for it.
Like I said, time and space separate the movie initially and now, and watching it on my own in isolation, I'm like, man, this was really good. This was really good. So yeah, it's just, the amount of emotional control that all these things around the film have, and the criticisms and all that, they can have a big impact.
Yeah,
I agree. So my next question was going to be like, what type of reviews do you find the most helpful? But
it's starting to sound like the answer is none of them.
None of them.
Well, I have some comments to say on that.
But so I think we should shift the discussion into how could reviews be more helpful?
I think the first thing that reviews can do to be more helpful is to not come out before the movie does.
That's interesting. I agree with that. I agree.
Yeah.
And I agree.
Oh boy, that was good.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because the first thing that they do is they start influencing people. It's one thing for a review to come out, let's say if it comes out, after the first weekend. That way, people who didn't necessarily want to jump up to go see it can kind of say, okay, I took my time. I didn't know what to think. Let's see what some other people think now. But this way, they're not influencing that first weekend of people who want to see it.
Yeah.
And I think it would also help if reviewers had to go see the movie with a regular, more than once definitely, but with a regular audience. I think the whole critic screening thing needs to end. I think reviews need to come out after the movies have come out, and that kind of gets back into are we doing a review or are we doing a critique? Because I wonder how many of these people would be interested in writing about the movie if they weren't getting their voice out there as part of the pre-release for the film. How many of them would be interested in reviewing a movie after people have already seen it?
But don't you think that affects how studios see it, because they use the reviews and the scores and whatever to market these films?
Yeah, they use it as marketing, but if you can't continue to market, if you're waiting for that to market your film, if that's part of your thing for marketing your movie, how much faith do you really have in the film? You have to wait for that, arbitrary stamp of approval to come from
I,
Rotten Tomatoes.
I honestly believe that we're at a point where studios, it's not the films that they don't have faith in, it's the audience that they've lost faith in.
Yeah,
Like you don't greenlight a film that you don't believe has
Potential.
something potential.
Yeah.
You don't put in millions of dollars, but I think that what's these studios are really afraid because all it take we saw it with Ghost in the Shell. All it took was for a group to say that wait, this is whitewashing, and the movie was DOA. We saw it with Passengers, the film with Chris Pratt and Jennifer Lawrence that came
Yep,
out.
yep.
The same
Yep.
thing. This narrative began about that this was not an appropriate relationship or however you want to put it.
It
and
was
the
insidious in some.
and the film suffered greatly for it.
comes from things that people don't understand. Some of it comes from early viewings.
Yes.
Some of it comes from just rumors and things like that. That thing with Ghost in the Shell, the thing that really bothers me the most about that is it. The whole issue was addressed in the movie, and a
Yeah.
lot of people went back and kind of wrote things that make it that made it sound like they, like the movie responded to the controversy by like rewriting and adding these things into the movie. It's
No.
like, no, that was always the point of the movie. But people
Even
started
before
saying this
that.
stuff before they even saw the movie.
The
Yeah,
story.
but that's kind of the issue though, because
Mhm.
again, we know that when these films we follow these films from they're basically almost their conception, right? From the moment that they're greenlit to go into shooting, a lot of these movies are followed all the way through. And what I've noticed is that it's very difficult for these reviewers, bloggers, criticizers, whatever, to kind of change their mind. Because if you say something for let's say 2 years, and then the movie comes out, you can't just flip and go the other way
Yeah.
right off the bat. I
Yeah.
feel
Well,
like that's also an issue.
It's their personalities, it's their reputation. A lot of that is tied up with their film criticism, especially these YouTube critics, which their face is just as much of an importance as what they're saying, from their mouths.
Right.
So
they're there
yeah.
for like the trailer reactions, and they'll write columns about these things and so
Sure.
on and so forth. So when the movie comes out, I feel like sometimes they feel as though they have to stand their ground, even though the film is showed them otherwise.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I agree. It starts with the comments like, "Who asked for this movie?"
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Which is one of the ones that I
We should have a
absolutely-
section in here for movie criticism fallacies. We should make that a whole we can just
That should be
Like
its
a-
own pod because
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's not just the fallacies, it's how these narratives begin. Like we can like follow it all the way through. We could just pick one movie and just follow the narratives that go along with this movie.
Well,
from-
you can follow them from specific writers, and I think that's part of what you're getting to. This idea that you have a media critic or someone like that who, as soon as a movie is announced, starts saying, "Hey, nobody asked for this movie. Who wants this movie?" Then they continue to cover the movie as it goes along, and then they're the ones writing the review for it too. And you can trace this entire thread all the way back to
like
the
the
beginning.
movie's existence is the problem at all. It's continuing with that line of thought. When a movie is a movie that no one asked for, apparently there aren't such things as pleasant surprises when it comes to films. That's never been a thing before. But with a lot of these critics, that inception, that everything after that is basically just a product of a flawed idea of an existence that shouldn't be, and they talk very condescendingly of these movies. Anything that happens is just like, oh, and you hear terms like, oh, they're just drawing whatever at the wall. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that what art is about?
Yeah.
I mean, to a certain degree.
You
I
just
mean,
talk about art, really?
well, I mean, don't we all agree on that here at the Exiles? Isn't that kind of our thing?
Yes, it is, but we're not talking about us though. We're talking about the rest of the world, and I think that's the problem. Like, there is no more distinction between art and entertainment.
and distractions.
Exactly.
You know,
It's
2 hour
all
distractions.
being wrapped into this one, and it's a real problem when somebody is trying to create art, and that it is being compared or expected to be again entertainment or
A
distractions.
Funko Pop.
Basically, that's it's like somebody draws the Sistine Chapel, and somebody's like, I don't know, that's not. There's not enough jokes on that thing, you know. It's we've that's what we've come to. So
Why does God have to be so ripped? How come God can't be pudgy? Are you not body positive?
Oh my goodness! You know, it's crossed some people's minds.
Do not
That-
put that out there in the universe. I swear to God.
Look, I'm just
Do
I'm
not.
just
This was gonna come back to bite us in the ass. Just
I'm
wait.
just saying. I am.
Oh.
You know, there's always that person out there. You know, that's always going to have that
On
thing
the
to
Chapel,
say.
does he have armpit hair? Because remember, Wonder Woman didn't, and that was
Okay,
a problem.
okay, guys, let's stay on topic. Let's stay on track, okay? Because this is exactly what I was worried about was gonna happen. So,
Yeah.
Mike, tell us, how do you believe that reviews could be more helpful?
It's not a review, you know. I mean, what needs to happen is that it needs to be an analysis. You need to break down a film, and you need to isolate that film and show, and first start off the film by explaining what you think the film was trying to accomplish, and then after that, explain the steps they take to get there, and if it made it or not based upon your analysis. I really enjoyed the last time that we talked about the BVS discussion about Batman or Superman with Gray, the same cast actually, and Gray was talking about his toolkit, basically a set of standards, a set of formulas, if you will. I know we hate that word formulas here, but a set of standards or formulas, tools, if you will, that you can use and repeat and get the same effect. So that way you can say, okay, I use this criticism, it works. I can use the same criticism. It's that consistency that you can use to judge film off of, you know? And I find that a lot of criticism...
You're saying what Gray said earlier, that it shouldn't be reviews, that it should be, we have to distinguish the difference between a review and a criticism, and that
Sure,
criticism should be taken more seriously than these reviews have, because at this point they're all at the same level.
Well,
Sure.
a critique by definition is a scholarly work. You know, it's attempting to not only assess a piece of material based on certain standards, but it's also looking at where it fits in the history of, you know, other like pieces. You know, so it is a scholarly work, and these things do take longer to produce, and they are much more in depth, and a lot of times they are more dispassionate, and I think that's what drives a lot of people away from them, because they don't allow you to be a personality. They don't allow you to get up in front of a microphone and shout, you know, angry missives about, you know, how the movie failed to do this, or how it didn't capitalize on that, or it had the wrong tone, or it had the wrong approach, or something like that, because a critique isn't emotive. A critique is intellectual.
Yeah.
And that takes, and first of all, it takes time to do. Second of all, you have to be able to do it. And there are a lot of people who do film reviews who can't do film critiques because they don't know anything about film.
Okay, I understand that, but you don't think that since film also carries a lot of emotion with it. So I understand what you're saying about the need for more intellectual approach to writing these critiques and these reviews, but there is this emotional aspect to filmmaking that cannot be left out, because the way we feel about a film also matters. Don't you think so?
Yeah, I think that what needs to happen is that people, I mean, a certain level of honesty, I think that's a big thing. I mean, you know, it seems like whenever we talk about the dishonesty in film criticism that we're making such a controversial statement. But, I mean, you know, honesty and dishonesty, a lot of times it's just facts, you know? I mean, they said this and it was not that. It was wrong, you know? Now, whether they just didn't know, they were ignorant, or whether they were lying, you know, that's up to you to decide, you know, and sometimes not even then, you know, that's just a subjective or an objective statement. But I think a certain level of honesty on the paper, and also just, you know, internal self-honesty. Like when I'm talking about a film, I try to do this, and I hope that, you know, all critics and bloggers and journalists do this as well, is to really help the reader understand where they're coming from and why they feel this way. Express to them that this is why I think that I feel this way, instead of stating everything that they feel as fact.
That's true.
Yes, yep. And you know, like, okay, I felt this way. So then they have to scurry to find some sort of intellectual sounding statement to make their feelings some sort of actual criticism. And that's I think one of the biggest underlying problems we have going on.
Being able to separate, you know, getting back to the question of, you know, should we separate, you know, emotions from critique? I mean, that is the problem with that statement is emotions are all individual and they're all subjective. Again, like we said earlier, you know, you can go into a movie and have a bad movie experience based on something that doesn't have anything to do with the movie. Now, should we be using that as a metric by which to grade a film? You know, if you're telling somebody how you feel about a movie, and like Mike said, you're not qualifying it as this is just how I feel about the film. You're putting an energy out there that's going to carry along with people into the movie. It's going to affect how they feel about it too.
It's the justification too. You know, it's also the justification. It's like, you know, you can say, hey, I felt this way, but then they go the next step and they try to justify it by making it as a fact, or making up some sort of arbitrary, you know, this arbitrary rule or standard, you know, like the whole tone thing. Like, you know, what could have happened? You know, some blogger woke up on the wrong side of the bed. He wanted to watch something happy. He didn't get something happy and go lucky. And now all of a sudden, tone is the most important thing about a film now. The way that whatever the movie makes you feel, instead of what the information that's actually trying to be communicated.
And that becomes a big problem when you're trying to guide somebody through a movie, through a plot, help them understand something that's happening in a film, and you can't separate how you feel from it, and it influences the way that you see things. You know, if you go into a movie, and I saw something earlier today, and I can't remember exactly what it pertained to, but it seemed like it was somebody was talking about something somebody else was saying. It was some stupid grapevine bullshit on Twitter, but it seems like, you know, as soon as you hit that first emotional blockade, the first time you're presented with something that creates that creates an uneasy feeling with you, you disengage from the material, or these people, they disengage from the material, and from that point on, nothing the movie can do is right. And then they sit down and they write about the movie, and everything in the movie is just awful, and it doesn't make any sense, and you know, it's incoherent and blah blah blah, and it's has nothing to do, again, it has nothing to do with the film as a piece of work. They're not writing about the movie, they're writing about how they feel about the movie.
Yeah.
And that's not useful to anybody.
I think another thing too is that a lot of these people don't have the ability to question themselves and why they feel certain ways. I mean, you know, if you're watching a film and you feel bad, there's a number of reasons why you can feel bad, and there's a number of reasons why you should feel bad. You know, I mean, imagine watching these big blockbuster movies that we're watching nowadays. You know, superheroes and capes and you know and robots and whatever flying around. You know, we have, you know, a criticism that we hear a lot is about tone, the way that action and violence is used and kind of as a tool within the story. I mean, when you're talking about especially heroes, that's a tool that they use to varying degrees, right? And when you're confronted, especially with what is considered to be evil or the antagonist or whatever the controversy is in the film, you should feel some discomfort, and a lot of times if the movie isn't telling you right away that this discomfort is going to be relieved in some way in the immediate future, then it, especially with these reviewers, they feel that the tone wasn't right. And now the way that films have chosen to mitigate this, to fix this, it's varied slightly, but the biggest criticism, like I was saying before, they're scurrying to find a way to justify the way that they feel or explain it. Oh, it wasn't funny enough. There wasn't humor. You have to lighten it. I mean, isn't there a way to lighten up a film other than humor? I know it's a little off subject, but you have to.
Why does the film need to be lightened up anyways? That's more my question.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're telling a serious story from a serious perspective, why does the film need to be lightened up? That's my question.
If the point is for the story, I mean, we're getting kind of way off track here, but just to add on to it,
it was going to happen.
If the point of the story is to be dramatic, is to be heavy, is to weigh on you, is to be contemplative, yeah. If you're worried about lightening it up, you're actually doing damage to that. Now, what people will say is, you need to have the lighter moments, so the darker moments are darker, so they stand out. You need that dramatic contrast, and that is true. But there is a difference between lightening something up and being humorous. You don't have to be funny to lighten something up. There's different ways to approach it, but it seems like humor is just the fast
lowest
food
hanging fruit, the easiest way, the lowest common denominator, it's
the fast food ratio. It's the exact right amount of fat to sugar to salt to get a particular reaction from people. It's just easier to do at this point. And we have to remember there's career screenwriters, they are people who do this for a job. They get hired to do this work. They're not necessarily working on a passion project every time they sit down to do something. So they got to crank this thing out. They got to get it done and get the effect that they need. And directors too. We tend to think that all people who go into making a film, like a director, is like, no, this guy who has this passionate vision for what he's doing. No, sometimes the director is just the dude that got the job.
So moving on. So our next topic is going to be, what are your views on Rotten Tomatoes? Do you think that it hurts? Does it help? Gray, why don't you get us started?
I think Rotten Tomatoes does not help, and the number one reason that they don't help is because they put their own aggregate score that they put together with their own metric and their own system in a big flashy graphic that's really, really easy to see right there on the page when it comes up, and then they put the actual tabulated score, critic score, underneath that in this little small text that's completely overshadowed by it, and that's making their system more important than the weighted average of the actual reviews. So when people are coming in, I mean, you look at this a lot of times with a lot of very popular films, a lot of the Marvel films and things like that. You'll see they have like an 80, 85, a 90% Rotten Tomato score, and then you look at the actual critic score, which I think filters out a lot of the just kind of websites and bloggers and things like that. The actual critic score is usually like 7.5, 7.7. Maybe you'll get up into the 8s. So they're making movies look better than they actually are, and it just makes you question the entire system. To me, I find this incredible disconnect. And then realizing that the whole thing is weighted on not necessarily critical assessments, but whether or not somebody would recommend a movie to somebody else. Now, I can think a movie, isn't necessarily a very good movie and still say, but yeah, I think people should go see it. Does that mean that I'm giving the movie a 90%, fresh rating, or I'm giving a fresh rating at all? Of course it doesn't, but that's the way they weigh things. And if you just want to, if all you want to do is just say recommended, not recommended, that's one thing. But we have a very specific relationship with numbers. We're taught that bigger numbers are better. So we tend to rely on that more. And the system is just, it doesn't reflect what the critics are actually saying about the films. And it's just again, it goes back to that.
Sometimes you said 7.5. Sometimes it's 6s.
Yeah,
there's 6s in there.
And it's like we said earlier. It's part of that marketing thing. It's being used more to drive business for a movie, which again kind of makes you look at it and go, okay, if this is being used as a marketing thing, how can we trust that the information that we're getting is real if these companies are using it to drive business?
Great, you're thinking too much.
But I think it's a reasonable question to ask. We're talking.
They're just movies, man. Like, you're just thinking too much, man.
If we're talking about their own rated average versus the critical score being used as marketing, how do we know who's not influencing that? How do we know that somebody isn't? Hey, what if we give you guys an exclusive on this thing? If you can goose our score a little bit for this next film, or go ahead and bump that up a little bit, just to get us into that top percentile, so it looks good on the poster.
With this whole thing, I'm surprised that a lot of people haven't questioned this yet. Rotten Tomatoes is predicated on negativity. Rotten Tomatoes, cinema sins. This is the kind of culture that criticism has become. It's more about highlighting the reasons to avoid things as opposed to talking about what worked and what didn't work. And I think that really goes to show that I think that Rotten Tomatoes doesn't just not help. I think it hurts. I think it promotes a culture that hurts films. And I feel like it's so easy to play the whole, they're just an aggregate game. That is the biggest cop out. And for people who don't want to think about it and to really consider how it affects the films that they watch and how it affects the entire industry as a whole, I can understand why it's so easy to use those cheap fallacious tactics to dismiss the negative impact that Rotten Tomatoes has. But yeah, it's all predicated around negativity, and I think that once again, it's really more of an emotional thing. It's about knee-jerk reactions, about quick, easily digestible information instead of understanding what these films are meant to do.
Right. I think it's very difficult as speaking as somebody who has a little bit of experience with this. If you're somebody who you have a word count cap that you have to stay under. It's one of the reasons why my articles tend to be a little bit longer. If you're a reviewer and you're limited to 1,200 words or 1,500 words or something like that, you're trying to not only provide some level of information, but you're also trying to provide some level of entertainment too. And it's a lot easier to take shots at something, and it seems that oddly enough, because of the very cynical culture we kind of exist in, it seems a lot more honest to be critical and negative about something than it is to be positive. We tend to look at anybody, any reviewer or anything like that, or any reviewer who's being very, very positive about something. We tend to think, all right, what's your game here?
I completely agree with that. And honestly, it's not just reviewers. It's even like between film fans. Like when we see somebody that's being very glowing about a movie, we tend to always approach it with a sense of
trepidation.
Yes. I feel, like you said, we take negativity as more honest than positivity, and that's a huge problem, especially when you're talking about art.
Yeah.
As far as this is concerned, I agree with Mike. I think Rotten Tomatoes hurts more than it helps anything. I think that it takes something as subjective as film, and it tries to make it into a hot or not type situation, which is completely counterintuitive. We're talking about a work of fiction, And fiction, whether it's through film, whether it's through literature, whether it's through whatever apparatus that it's delivered, is going to resonate with everybody differently. I've said this before. So the idea that you can take that and break it down to a single number is beyond ridiculous to me.
Oh yeah.
It's beyond ridiculous. I do not like the studios using this number to market their films, because when their films are being trashed, they're out here saying, no, 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 this is not right. But the moment that they get a 90% rating, they will go and be the first one to put that. Like,
Yeah.
I hate that when I buy a ticket online, I have to look at the Rotten Tomatoes score before I can buy the ticket.
Yeah.
Why is that the case? I hate that sometimes when I go buy a Blu-ray, the Rotten Tomatoes score is
On
plastered.
the cover.
No,
What?
it's printed into the ink. That's a part of the design of the cover.
Yeah.
Yeah,
How did we get here? And that's a serious question. How did we get here? And something that bothers me, it's seeing these scores being used to debate and discuss film. It's seeing these scores used to prop up or break down other people's opinions and feelings about this movie. If I hear one more time, your opinion cannot be taken seriously because you like this movie and this movie got a 23% on Rotten Tomatoes, I will lose my damn mind. People. Like,
we got here because we, as an audience,
asked for it.
well, we're first of all we're overwhelmed. I mean, you have to look at the number of films. I think last year there were something like 400, at least 400 movies that got MPAA ratings that were released.
and
Okay.
that's not counting the stuff that's coming from Netflix, that's coming from Amazon, that's coming from Hulu.
YouTube.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We
Amazon.
there's so much content out there that it's extremely difficult to parse through it all and figure out some sort of priority listing, or if you're going to be interested in it at all. So we turned to these people who are supposedly this is the idea. This is where we get off track. These people are supposedly more knowledgeable than we are about these things. That's why we trust them. We put our trust in them because they are supposed to know more than we do about what's good and what's bad and how well something is put together. And then we take their advice on what to go see. And again, this is another thing that goes back to that validation. You know, if we are told by somebody, look, this thing is very good, you're going to like it, you know, and we see that a lot of people are gravitating towards it, we want to be part of that. Nobody wants to be that person that stands on the outside and kind of goes, well, that's not true. I want to be that person. But most people don't want to be the person that
You're
stands
an exile, my friend.
Yeah, that stands on the outside shaking their head going, I don't get it. You know, nobody wants to feel like that.
And I've seen it. I've seen it happen. Like, if you pay attention to conversations, like just taking place around you, like I've seen people talk about films that are, you know, genuinely loved, and you can see that there's always like at least one person in the group that doesn't agree, but will go along with it. Like, I'm sure that we all have experiences with this, of you know, somebody talking about something that they have no idea about because that's the knowledge that's been put out there by Rotten Tomatoes. I'm sure that happens. We see this happen constantly, and it hurts not only the way that we discuss film, the way that we take in film, but it hurts the way that films are conceived and made.
Yeah.
Because studios, when they're going to greenlight a movie, are going to ask themselves, is this movie going to get me a 70% on Rotten Tomatoes? What do I need to do to make sure that I get a fresh rating? And once that starts happening, we all lose. That film that can touch you, that film that can change your perspective and your view on a lot of things might never be made because of this number.
See, yeah. I don't agree with that. I think studios are far more concerned with an expectation for return on investment than they are,
But
than they are a Rotten
okay.
Tomato score. I
I'm
mean,
not
look at
disagreeing with you.
look
but
at
do you
something
re-
like
No,
look
but
at something like
just saying real
Let's go,
quick.
people. Let's go.
Just saying real quick. I'm not disagreeing with that point, but you cannot. But like, are you saying that there is not a correlation between a Rotten Tomato score and a film's box office numbers?
Oh no, there absolutely can be, but I don't think that that's something that the studio goes into the movie thinking about. I think when they're looking at making an investment in a film, they are looking at what audience do we expect to reach with this material, and how much do we expect to get out of it, and that determines whether or not they greenlight something at all, and what
Chicken
the
or
budget
the egg? Chicken or the egg? That's what this
Well,
is.
you
Because
look at,
I mean,
look at something like A Star Is Born. Okay, A Star Is Born not making a ton of money, so we think, oh, it's not doing all that well. But A Star Is Born only had a $30 million budget.
No, Star Wars is making a lot of money. I don't think you can say
it's making good money. It's not making bango money. It's not making blockbusters. It's not making Venom money right now.
I mean, but it's not a blockbuster movie though.
But at the same time, this is also a movie that the studio looked at. I don't know who the actual financer was. I don't know if the financing came from Live Nation or if it came from Warner Brothers, but it wasn't a real expensive movie either, and that's because they were looking at it as, who is this going to reach? This is the third remake of a 70-year-old premise. By a first-time director and an actress who was
musician.
popular, actress musician who was extremely popular a few years ago, who has since kind of fallen off and is untested in this realm. I don't think they were worried about whether or not the movie was going to get an 80% on Rotten Tomatoes. I think they were worried about, who are we even going to get in the door to see this? Who is the audience for this movie first and foremost? The Rotten Tomatoes thing, that's a good thing, though. That came later. Now, that became something that they could make part of the pre-release hype for it.
This would definitely be a good subject for analysis. I mean, I think that, the information that at least I have in my mind, the knowledge that I have at this moment isn't really enough to really come to a stern conclusion on the matter. I feel like, I really don't know enough to actually have to be an authority on the matter. So, I mean, I agree from both sides, and I feel like it's a very chicken or the egg thing. I mean, like, if a movie succeeds, right, then it's going to critically, oftentimes it also has an effect on the box office returns. And, with all these numbers that these people are getting, I mean, they have the ability to analyze this and see exactly the actual effects. They know better than any of us what the actual effects of Rotten Tomatoes have on their films. And we've seen through experience what it can do. So, we know that it can help a film. And if this happens time and time and time again, how could it not factor? I mean, if you're just going on a basis of pure logic, how could it not factor in,
Well, but then again, you do have situations like we have with Blade Runner 2049 last year. Now, this is a movie that pulled an 87% tomato meter rating, had an average critic rating of 8.2, audience score of 81%. I don't know who they got that number from, because according to the box office, nobody went to see it. So, I mean, these things are not. There can be a correlation, but there isn't always a correlation, and it does come down to who is the material geared for. If they had managed to cut, or decided to somehow do whatever it is they needed to do, maybe more score music, maybe cut a few scenes and everything, if they could have got that movie down to a PG-13, or decided to make it a PG-13, I'm pretty sure it would have made a shit ton of money.
Sure, but we also have
had
to
access
consider
to that bigger audience.
I agree.
No, but getting butts in seats has a very little to do with anything about the filmmaking process, really. I mean, how many times have we watched a trailer for a film, went to the actual film, and it was completely different, or watch trailer number 1 and then we watch trailer number 2 and it feels like a different movie. All sorts of things like that. Getting interest, getting hype, getting butts in seats, I think that, if we were to say that the way that the movie's made and the actual content of the movie is really the number one factor that these studios are taking consideration when we're making the film, and less so the end, consensus of, critics and audience and etc., then, that would be excluding the idea that there's a lot more that goes into what gets butts and seats other than just the content of the film. You
Yeah.
know?
I mean, but I think as a studio, you have to think about it because you're putting in. I think it's more expensive now to make a movie than ever, right?
Well,
It
it's more
can
expensive
be.
now to make a more expensive or a higher return movie. I mean, with blockbusters, blockbusters that tons of people will go to see, the expectations are only increasing. So to make the same returns, you have to put more money into
Money.
it.
Well, there's also, you have to remember there, or not remember necessarily, but I think it's worth mentioning that there is a lot of studios have a hierarchy of filmmaking, and what they consider. They'll dump a ton of money into a big blockbuster film or a superhero film or something like that, but they don't necessarily expect those movies to be good. They don't really care whether or not those are really well made, because we see how willing they are to chop them up, drag huge pieces of the plot out, and completely change characters around and reshoot gigantic chunks of the film, and try to make it a different movie afterwards. So you have those big movies, and those movies are there just to generate money. They don't care whether the movies are good. They just care about how much money they make. And then they have that other side of filmmaking where they are very concerned about the quality of the movie, but they don't necessarily expect to get a whole lot of return. They know they're making subjectively better films, or more artistic films, or more creative films, but
That's
they're
a
not
good
putting
point.
they're not
Yeah.
putting as much money into them because they genuinely don't expect anybody to go see them. But those are the kinds of movies that look good to have on your, to have in
Resume.
your resume, or to have in your portfolio or something like that. That's how you build credibility
It's a very
as
good
a
point.
studio.
I agree. Okay, yeah, I'll agree with that point. So, moving on forward, what do you guys think about the gap that the seeming gap between critics and audiences? Mike, why don't you get us started?
I mean, this has really been highlighted. I mean, it almost seemed like this question was literally made in response to Venom, which is
I mean,
great.
it's not just Venom.
No,
I mentioned
it's
it at the
not,
top of the. I mentioned it at the top of the pod, but it's not
It-
just Venom.
Yeah, I mean, it's in the top of our minds right now because of Venom, and yeah, it's been a problem for a little while now. But yeah, I mean, as far as the gap goes, it's this disconnect. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with people who take their time to review and analyze a film just out the gate are already coming from a different perspective. If you actually believe that a film is worth analyzing, it's worth critiquing, and you're going into it from this kind of this artistic intellectual standpoint, you're already coming from a certain area that a lot of people just don't come from, and I get that. There's always gonna be a disconnect. I think as far as whether you liked it or not. I mean, if we're just gonna break it down to, oh, we liked it, we didn't like it, I mean, I think the disconnect seems to be greater than what it is because films are broken into such binary, hyperbolic terms as good and bad. If you do it that way, then yeah, there are going to be movies that are going to seem hugely different from the people who review them and the people who consume the content. I also think that a lot of reviewers and journalists and bloggers, they spend too much time together. um, and
Some would say the same about us.
Yeah.
yeah, but they definitely have their own community, and they share these ideas about films before they even start putting pen to paper, and you can tell. For people who apparently wouldn't talk to each other at all, or really be in tune with each other, they say some very eerily similar things and carry some very eerily
similar.
Yeah, oh yeah.
It's sometimes You think that they all wrote it together at a Starbucks sitting side by side,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and they're like
Yeah.
looking at each other's work, like, "Oh yeah, that's so good. Let me get that in there too." Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's how it feels like. I mean, but that's just what I intuit. So.
so you feel that the reason is because critics are basically now they're basically their own sector of film viewers.
Well, yeah. I mean, they're basically writing for themselves. You
So
know,
basically,
basically.
it's kind of like what Gray said earlier that they should see these films with a real audience instead of with just other critics.
Yeah. That adds up to me.
Okay,
Yeah.
Gray.
You know, this gap between critics and audiences, it all comes from your intent when going to see the film. What do you expect to get out of it? Audiences only expect to be entertained. You know, you go out, it costs, like, when my wife Jessie and I go to the movies or something like that, it costs, like, between $10 and $12 a ticket, depending on what the show is and what, where we go to see it. It's we got to go get dinner, we got to, you get snacks at the theater and things like this. It's an investment in time, it's an investment in money. When you go to the theater, you want to get something, feel like you're getting something back for what you're putting out there. Now, Jessie and I are a little bit different, much to her growing concern about what's happened to her over the last 15 years of us being together. We go to a film, we have acknowledged that we are not the typical audience for movies. And it is difficult, like Mike says, I go online and I talk to people every day for whom movies are more than just a way to pass an evening. So you do get a different perspective. This critic perspective. It's not necessarily a critic perspective, but it's the perspective of somebody who is looking at a movie to be more than just a way to spend 2 hours. You're not just going to have, like, see a bunch of pretty lights and hear the loud sounds and things like that, which is what you hear a lot from critics and writers and things like that when it comes to a lot of blockbusters. They'll talk about how big and noisy and blah 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 and all that kind of stuff. But the reason that movies keep getting made like that is because they have an impact on the audience. Studios do make certain movies are movies that get made with critics in mind, and they kind of say, look, no, that's when you start to get into, like, the Oscar bait films and things like that. They know how to speak that film language to people who are looking at movies to be more than just a distraction. But there is also that segment of filmmaking that is all about just distractive, entertaining filmmaking. And I think Venom is, and I know that we're not talking specifically about Venom, but Venom is a great example of that. It is a movie that, from a storytelling point of view, is a huge jumble. There are big pieces of it that you can tell are missing. There are things that just flat out don't add up, and you can kind of see where some of the seams are, where it's been pulled apart and kind of put back together. But the overall effect of it is to create, or it does create, an entertaining movie with all of its flaws in the way it's put together. When you fit all these problematic pieces of the puzzle together, the picture looks nice. It's an entertaining movie, and in the end, that's all people really care about. That's all the audience